OMORI, the long-awaited psychological horror RPG released at the end of 2020, has enraptured the minds of so many, myself included. I remember learning of this game's production years ago, kind of forgetting about it, and then hearing it was finally being released on Christmas. I'm sure many would agree with me when I say the wait was worth it. I'm endlessly thankful I was able to play this game. It's an experience in video game storytelling which cannot be properly compared to anything. That being said, it is a piece of media which, I believe, every single person should enjoy knowing as little as possible about the story beforehand. So this is your spoiler warning, then. Really, do leave if you haven't played this game, or at least if you don't know the main storyline. Alright, now that the obligatory spoiler warning is out of the way, why would you click on the video if you're avoiding spoilers? Anyway, the spoiler warning serves two purposes. First, it's just common etiquette, and second, it gives me the chance to lavish more praise on this fantastic game. I am being genuine when I say this is a spoiler warning I cannot emphasize enough, and I'm beyond grateful that OMOCAT persevered through so much to deliver this game to us. OMORI is rich in intricately woven themes and motifs, compelling characters, and a story which drives home emotions I didn't know I could feel. This is all to say that there are a million things one could discuss in response to OMORI. But out of a desire to present a topic I'm passionate about and that might be forgotten in the shadows of OMORI's other towering concepts, I want to talk about the character Aubrey. Aubrey, whom you first meet in the neighbor's room, is a plucky young girl about your age. She's described as someone who stands by her convictions, a person who dedicates herself fully to what she tries to do, and an all-around reliable friend. At least, this is the description put forward about the Aubrey residing in imaginary headspace. This idealized version of Aubrey is quite disparate from the real Aubrey. The Aubrey we meet second is still stubborn and still dedicated, but her morals and her outlook on life have shifted. It's revealed how her aggression has overcome her. She lashes out at those who get in her way, and she has an unrelenting hatred for Basil. It's the hatred for Basil, an almost unhateable character, that got me really thinking about Aubrey and what drove her to such animus. Certainly, the death of Mari and subsequent distancing of her friends in combination with her broken household would put anyone on edge. And the hatred for Basil is explained by the end of the game, wherein the player learns that Aubrey thinks Basil had scribbled over pictures of Mari and the gang. She can't understand this, and her confusion translates outward as scorn. I think it's this specific interaction which typifies the character of Aubrey. To understand what I mean, we need to examine exactly what fuels her anger. After Mari's death, she senses that her friends are growing distant. It's essential to remember where Aubrey comes from and how these people came to be her friends. She relied on them for support. Her home life was troublesome, so she counted on her friends to keep her going, to keep her happy. So when Mari dies, not only does Aubrey lose an integral part of her life, but her entire circle of friends, her circle of people sustaining her, starts to fall apart. As it does, Aubrey is affected fundamentally. Without her friends, she has so little left. Hence, when she believes Basil has tarnished the memory of what was the happiest time of her life, a time that Mari therefore represents, the only emotion she can feel is disdain. Her friends meant everything to her, so the idea that Basil would do something like that, she just can't come to terms with the reason for it. It's so offensive to everything she stands for, to the convictions she would never ignore, that her entire view of Basil is shattered. She was already in a precarious place, and this pushed her over the edge. Instead of dialing in on the actual case behind the vandalized memories, she responds to her puzzlement with rage. So why is this heart-rending development in the relationship between Aubrey and Basil so indicative of what Aubrey's character means? Well, I want to repeat how stark the difference between the younger and older Aubrey is. Just how dramatically divergent these two are in everything besides their most basic personality traits is obviously important. And naturally, the turning point in her becoming the person she ends up as is Mari's death. As such, I believe the explanation for her shift and thus the explanation for why she torments Basil, is that Aubrey copes with Mari's death and the subsequent repercussions, but she does so toxically. Coping is a very apparent theme in OMORI. Each major character has to cope with Mari's death. Sunny and Basil have a little more to cope with, explaining why the major conflict hinges around them, but I think viewing the entire story under a lens utilizing coping as a theme provides the most profound insights when looking at Aubrey's development, since, in my opinion, her coping defines her later characterizations. Negative coping mechanisms as a means of dealing with trauma or stress are often thought of as self-defeating behaviors, which basically do more harm than good. They distract from or shut down feelings in a way that either doesn't properly deal with them or generates a more detrimental trauma or stress. I think it's safe to say Aubrey engages in negative coping. But at the risk of leaving the realm of actual psychology, I prefer to classify Aubrey's mechanisms under the umbrella of toxic coping. That is, her coping mechanisms not only deal with her personal trauma in an unhealthy way, but the practices she engages in have the potential to infest her relationships and negatively affect those around her. The crux of it being toxic is that Aubrey embraces this. It's sad to see, but as her redefined relationship with Basil shows, her inclination to deal with her trauma in an outwardly violent way comes to define her. She goes all in on this new personality, utilizing this newfound coping mechanism despite how it hurts others. This is toxicity in the form of coping, and it's depressing to see how Aubrey, an optimistic little girl, feels compelled to cling to this toxicity to try and assuage some of her pain. Before finishing up by talking about why the fact that she releases her frustrations onto Basil leaves no doubt that Aubrey feels as if she has to be toxic to save herself, I want to explore her non-toxic coping mechanisms, because Aubrey is one of the few characters whom we see try and deal with Mari's death in more than one way, and we see it pretty directly. You see, Aubrey goes to church looking for some peace, for some finality, regularly too. While this does foremost serve to illustrate that Aubrey is coping actively, it's important to take into account her attitude toward church. She's looking for peace, but she has not found it. I think there's a deeper reason for that besides it being an incredibly poignant trauma. As Aubrey slips further down into the habits which facilitate her toxicity, the potential church would hold for her decreases. That is, in order for something like church, which requires that the person seeking comfort be open-minded and reflective, to work for Aubrey, she would need to be a different person. We see the consequences of exactly this in the dolorous fight with Aubrey in said church. As the affecting, anguished track, "It Means Everything," drones in the background, the pained, crazed look in her eyes conveys how Aubrey truly is no longer the person she was. She doesn't care. She'll do what she wants, and she is tired of feeling like the world around her is dead set on abandoning her. The judgmental looks of churchgoers silently criticizing Aubrey's appearance are silent indeed, but that is not to say Aubrey does not know she is being judged. She throws herself at the church, hoping for some remedy to her pain, but too much of her has been afflicted by her pernicious personality for it to yield any success. This is yet another agonizing consequence of her toxic coping. Positive coping mechanisms wane in their capabilities. Aubrey persists anyway, though, because she knows negative coping is not ameliorating the trauma in the way she wants. This is such an important, if heartbreaking, point. She does all the things she does, including the ones which hurt her former friends and herself, not because she is a naturally bad person. She is susceptible to becoming a bad person because she cares so much and because she needed something, anything to hold on to. When her friends seemed to abandon her when she needed them most, Aubrey felt trapped, and the person she became is almost entirely attributable to her predisposition toward toxic coping mechanisms. Church is ineffective because she is too far gone. Her perception of the situation has molded her personality such that toxicity is a part of her. And that leaves us with one major idea. We know Aubrey regrets the way she behaves, especially towards Basil. She learns that everyone dealt with Mari's death in different ways, and she accepts that. This is the most important realization of hers, that while she felt personally hurt by what she saw as her friends isolating themselves from her, she responded in a manner that only matched the negativity she perceived. That's what's so scary about toxic negativity. It does not originate in a vacuum. It is a response to some suffering. This clouds one's judgment on the trauma and can transform one's psyche until the peace they seek becomes unobtainable. On top of this, the perception of others' coping mechanisms is obscured as well. This explains why Aubrey finds Basil so objectionable. She already indirectly blames her friends for leading her to this point, so any of Basil's actions that don't align with her worldview are reprehensible to her. This evokes violent tendencies and only damages the relationship more. This is the worst part of Aubrey's toxic coping. Basil and Aubrey want the same thing, as indicated by, say, Aubrey's frequent returns to Mari's grave and Basil's pining that things would go back to the way they were. Each of them just wants to feel like they did before Mari's death. They want the solace of friendship and the solidity of confiding in a found family. When they both lose that, they both want it back. Thus, a dichotomy exists in the way either copes, and Aubrey's response, while natural, is so devastating because what she wants is exactly the same as Basil, but she is violent and he is not. Hence, that Aubrey is so awful toward Basil is poignant, not only in that the duality in their responses is a fascinating piece of storytelling, it shows how trauma can drive people apart despite dealing with the same thing and desiring the same outcome. Trauma is volatile, and OMORI presents the spectrum of responses to it in its most visceral and compelling form. No character in OMORI can be truly said to cope with Mari's death properly. That each of them realizes this by the end is integral to the resolution of the story. Aubrey, though, is the only one whose negative coping mechanisms include a shift in the regard she has for those involved with her trauma, her old friends. And thus, I believe Aubrey specifically teaches us the most about what trauma can do to a person with regard to their view of the world. A spunky young girl can have her world shattered, and her response reveals what simply trying to deal with such a dramatic upheaval can do to a person. It's sad, and it's somber, but OMORI accomplishes something incredible here by letting us peer into the worldview of someone engaging in toxic coping.